You know, Cornell was such an important time of my life. I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I was telling Kathy, I came from a somewhat sketchy, downwardly mobile family. You know, we had no money. I had no idea how I could go to any college. I kind of felt like I had the grades and everything to get in. I was lucky I had a friend whose mother was a guidance counselor, and she said, "Don't worry about the college that you can afford. Get in the most expensive college you can get into, because those are the places that have money." And so it was probably the greatest gift in my life was I managed to get in. I originally was an engineer, which lasted about a week, and I kind of drifted around. I spent part of my freshman year in the division of unclassified students, which is, I can't find a way to contribute to DUS, but it helped me find my way. As I migrated from the engineering quad over to here, we spent a lot of time in Goldman Smith and Lincoln Hall back in the day. But I have no idea how they figured it out, but I was the recipient of this full 4-year scholarship called the Maud Alice Palmer Scholarship, and it was for people from Pittsburgh, and you couldn't get married, you had to maintain residency in Pittsburgh, and everything was paid for. You had to have a B+ average, which I managed to do. And, you know, that was like a reset button, and it kind of gave me entree to this whole other world and this kind of provincial, suburban Pittsburgh world, which was wonderful too. But here I was exposed to these really smart people, the faculty, the fellow students, people from all over the world. And I was this kind of wide-eyed kid from Pittsburgh, and not particularly sophisticated compared to people like Michael and some of the crowd we ran with. But I kind of tried to play catch up as I went along. And, you know, any person, any study was kind of what I really needed, because I didn't know, you know, did kind of okay at everything in high school. And, you know, here I kind of was, because I had that scholarship, I had the room. Nobody was paying for it but Maud Alice Palmer, and she wasn't around to talk what major I should have. So I kind of was drawn like a moth to the flame of something I really was interested in and excited about. And that started with theater, and I was a theater major, and kind of doing some plays and doing some acting. And through some painful experience, I realized I wasn't going to become a professional actor, but there was this 16mm film course that Marilyn Rivshin taught, and that's where the bug bit me. This is what it is I want to do, and you know, I have to figure it out. And it took me a while after undergraduate school, but having that room in the freedom of the rub of the green of this campus, and taking courses with all these interesting people and great topics was just really wonderful, and it kind of was the foundation of everything I've done since. So that's why I'm back here. I'm so grateful that Cornell did that.
And I'm here because Scott invited me, which is likewise, I'm very grateful. I have a different background. My father was an academic physician at Yale, and so I grew up with great libraries. In high school, I used to go down to the Sterling Library and the Beinecke Library, and so I was very much at home sort of in the academic setting here. But as Scott said, sort of any study, I really took advantage of all the different kinds of classes here and all the different experiences you can have here. And along the way, I discovered theater. I was not a high school theater kid. I was never in a show in high school. I still can't sing. And it opened me up to storytelling in a way that I think to this day is important. And I'm just so profoundly grateful that I had a quote unquote liberal arts education. You know, I took an anthropology class right here in Goldwyn Smith Hall. We put on a show here at Lincoln Hall, and the campus wasn't what it is now. My gosh, you guys have an incredible facility. But as Scott said, the students were amazing. And in the theater department, which was I think it had just started a graduate study where Jimmy Smits and Jane Lynch, among others, had decided to hone their craft. So we were exposed to really talented people and ideas, and I think that set me on the way to figuring out what I wanted to do, which I think like Scott, we didn't figure out what we wanted to do until well after graduation, but we learned how to learn here.
Kind of tying, like, another question that kind of talks about your Cornell experience. I don't know about the rest of everyone here, but I'm a freshman, so I kind of have a long way to go in terms of, like, exploring campuses and kind of the campus and the opportunities that we have here. So I wanted to ask if you guys had any, like, specific relationships with people, or memories, or even spots on campus that, like, really resonated with you and kind of left an impact. Anything like more?
Wow, absolutely, all of those things. These were like just this whole world of new relationships, and starting with freshman year, and I kind of honed my way in. I started down in my day. The U-Hauls were these horribly grungy first year dorms. I don't know if you were there.
Yeah, I was in Sperry Hall, which doesn't exist.
Which was cooler than the regular U-Hauls.
Sperry was integrated by rooms, so
Yeah.
it was boy, girl, like that.
We had like 1 floor of women and 3 floors of men, and it could get a little antediluvian back then. I'm sure everybody's much better behaved now than we were back in our days. But at first it was like, where are you from? What did you score in the SATs? And what are you majoring in? And the conversation started in this very general way, and then after a while, you'd find the classes that you were interested in, and within those classes, there would be people you found interesting, and you liked the same kind of music. You went to the plays, so you started to have this kind of, we kind of became this little mini bohemian artsy theater crowd that Michael and I ran in.
I mean, I don't know if music is still as potent a force on campus as it was then, but I remember the Police concert in Bailey Hall. I remember Jorma Kekkonen would play in clubs around, and the Grateful Dead at Barton Hall. That was a huge event. So I'm sure you have similar,
And then there were college bands, like there was Better Music Through Science and Faculty Party and The Symbols. Like your friends would be in these bands, and that was really fun too. So the part of it will be you'll just naturally fall in. You'll go through a series of friendships here, and you'll kind of find yourself more and more simpatico with the crowd you develop and evolve into. And a big part of that was like through our courses, because you'd be taking, I gravitated towards people who were in arts and sciences and theater, and that was kind of largely the gang.
What may be different is now you all can see pretty much any movie on your computer. We would go to the Cornell Cinema and we'd see everything from, they showed that Linda Lovelace movie. Deep Throat one time. Like a porno.
I don't think I went.
A porno movie was a huge,
That was a big draw, yeah.
big deal on campus. It was very exciting for everybody. And on the other hand, you'd get, Bicycle Thief and Italian movies that you just couldn't see anywhere else. So I guess what I just urge people thinking back on my own experience is seek out the experience you can't get anywhere else. And whether that's, there was this big red truck, what was that called on the West, where you go in the middle of the night for
a hot truck?
A hot truck.
Yes.
Still there.
And that
they still have that?
So that was a gathering place at 2 or 3 in the morning. There was no insomnia cookies. You wanted that late night snack, and people would be hanging out there. But whatever it is that's going on now, I think if you can take advantage of those unique experiences, that's the best.
And those friendships that you make here, they end up being lifelong friendships. We haven't seen each other a whole lot, but immediately we had dinner the other night, and it kind of felt like no time had passed, really, other than our hair and beards,
Or lack of hair.
But, I've ended up working, not so much with my Cornell friends, but with my grad school friends. Like a lot of my professional career has intersected with those folks. So, but it's just such a great kind of time to be able to absorb so many different things and, try different things too, whatever your major is, like, I think I said this to Kathy when they were talking about it. One of the best courses I took was this Roman history course, and I became a lifelong, amateur scholar of the classical era. And it was actually something Jesse and I kind of bonded over when I met him about doing Succession. So you never know where all this stuff that comes in, you never know when it'll come out, but all that stuff, all the different distribution things that I took in different classes, it meant something and added a little layer to how I think about things.
And back in terms of finding your people, which I think is a big part of college, my freshman roommate was from Haiti. And across the hall was a woman whose principal language was Spanish. And so I think you don't realize it when you're here, but this college campus and many others are some of the most diverse places on earth. So when you find your people, they can be all different kinds of people. And that's so exciting. And I just urge you to take advantage of meeting different kinds of people.
Just like switching gears a little bit, how did you go from like your time at Cornell to being a producer? And also like what different tasks are encompassed in like being a producer?
You want to go for this?
Sure. I think both Scott and I went to grad school. I went to grad school in theater arts as a director. But both before grad school and after, there's a lot of learning before you become producer. You know, we've talked about it before. There's no clear, it's not like, oh, you go to med school, then you go to residency, and you have an internship. It doesn't work like that. So you gain as much life experience as you can, and then if you're lucky, you find yourself in a position where you can apply some of that experience to being a production assistant or being an associate producer or writing a grant. I mean, one of the things that I urge people all the time is work on your writing skills. So you can write the letter to that person you want to work with. And I don't mean texting skills. I mean like a good letter that speaks from your own voice and speaks as to why you're interested. And I think that was a big part of, setting you up for success as a producer. Beyond that, in terms of what a producer does, it's a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to me, the first tasks at for me, my experience was like being enthusiastic about showing up with donuts and coffee for the carpenters who were building a set. And there's this profession, the movie business, isn't that old, compared to things like medicine and architecture and law, and it hasn't been codified to that degree. Like there's different things that are codified in terms of unions and how we work, but it's constantly reinventing itself. So it's changed dramatically in my career. I spent the first 10 years of my career doing movies for cinema theaters with big Hollywood famous directors like Milos Forman and Sidney Pollack and Ang Lee, and those movies still get made on a certain level, but there's many less of them now. And now there's this thing that didn't exist then, which is high-end TV prestige drama, and I've been lucky to straddle those two eras and kind of experience both at a pretty strong level. And the foundation of how I do Succession or The Night Of is really based on how I work. Like I come from from a cinematic movie perspective. And anyway, the role of producer is not particularly well defined. And there's different tranches. There's people who have lots of money and they can finance things and they get a title. There's people who have relationships in Hollywood and they have the kind of studio and talent agency and literary connections, and they can create a project, where they option books and get writers and directors, and that's a way. And then my way in was kind of on the manufacturing end. I worked my way up from a PA on, production sides, on shoots and things, and kind of became, senior enough that I was in charge of how to shoot.
And that's the best way, because it's sort of learning how to make the sausage.
Yeah. Well,
you can always figure out how to spend money. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So, a lot of what it is, it's really about kind of figuring out what needs to be done in your area of it. And they start by giving you a relatively small area, and so you'll get your foot in the door and you're kind of in charge of taking the lunch order, and it's not an uncomplicated thing with 40 or 50 people who all have to have lunch at 1 o'clock.
Gluten-free.
Yeah, and so doing that, or it might be, in my day, it was like Xeroxing and collating and, putting together written documents. Nobody uses paper documents anymore. Occasionally we put things out on paper, but it's much rarer, but that was a big part of the skill set. So and what will give you more and more to do and more responsibility, more money and credit is like applying yourself with the kind of energy and enthusiasm of those kind of early, more mundane tasks, so that people, they say, well, this person has good energy and they're smart and they keep being ready to do more. Maybe I'll give them a little more. So that's how we do it.
So at what point in your careers do you feel like you knew, well, okay, I'm going to be a documentary filmmaker, I'm trending toward doing more feature films. Like, how did you know which direction you were going to end up?
Well, when I graduated Cornell, I really wanted to be a combination of Orson Welles, Elia Kazan, and Sergei Eisenstein. I wanted to do plays and then translate those plays to cinema, and I wanted to break all the cinematic bounds. And as Scott mentioned before, that you learn your own limitations, and just as we each learned that we weren't great actors, I was always cast as Benvolio, the best friend. Hi, hey Romeo, I was never the bad guy.
I was the gay neighbor.
There you go, and you realize, well, maybe your talents lay elsewhere if people keep telling you that. And what I realized at some point was I got this great opportunity to work with top talent in the voiceover booth, because I was working under what I call the Ken Burns umbrella. Ken had done the Civil War series, which was a national phenomenon. Everyone looked at our history through it. He sold 2 million books at $60 a book, and I thought, wow, that's $120 million in books. This is a real business, these kind of long-form historical documentaries. And there were great talents who were reading voices, Arthur Miller and Jason Robards and Eli Wallach, and the top actors of the time. And I loved being in a small room with them and sort of working with them on their reading of historical material. And then the next thing you knew, I was producing these documentaries, which for me were the best kind of oral report. You all do a report for your class and there's 20 people there. Well, I'd share this and all my relatives around the country could see it, and a million other people. In the case of the history of the West, it was something like 38 million people could see. You could hear the result and see the result of what we worked on for a few years. So for me, it was a combination of that excitement from education and that little bit of showbiz in terms of working with the talent. And it's sort of, for me, it was like that overnight paper that you stay up for all night, but if you really love it, the time's like, wow, this turned out great. And that sort of, for 2 or 3 years doing that, like every night, every day, you maintain that excitement and you realize, okay, let's stick with this. What about you?
Well, for me, I had a somewhat different trajectory. I moved back to Pittsburgh to help my mom after my dad passed, and I knew I wanted to be in film. I had no idea. I had no connections, nothing, and so I kind of spent a year putting our house back together, and then I wanted to, I guess I got to get a job, proper job. I was waiting tables and working in an department store, and that wasn't what I wanted to do. And so I had this kind of quiet night in the house that I was kind of restoring, and I said, well, if I'm going to do this, what's close to that here? And the thing that was close was the public television station in Pittsburgh, where they make Mr. Rogers. So I went down there and offered to come in as an unpaid intern just to get my foot in the door, and they, I had typed up my resume and written a letter that Michael emphasizes an important part of what you need to do, and they thought I was interested enough to give it a shot. So I spent maybe 4 years at WQED in Pittsburgh, kind of working my way up to a certain point where I was producing and directing segments for a documentary series. It wasn't my show. I was I I can't remember what my title was, probably associate producer. But they would let me take a crew around, and I would, go interview people and do B-roll and cars and things, and people walking into buildings, the things you kind of cut in and around the kind of interview in that format. And I liked it. And then for me, I my heart was in scripted, and I don't think I had quite the lofty ambitions of Elia Kazan, Orson Welles, and Eisenstein, but I was kind of like hoping to the cool things that were happening then were like Jim Jarmusch and the Coen brothers and indie film, and so I kind of wanted to go figure out how to break in that world. And I was very art house in orientation.
I was in love with Esther Bullitt.
Oh sure, of course, from Stranger Than Paradise.
She was.
I got to work with Jim, but maybe we'll get to that a little bit later. I never met Esther, but so for me the transition was to go to grad school at Columbia, and from there I had to start all over again, like entry-level jobs, and work as a PA. I was around 29, 30, but that's when I got onto the ladder. It took me year after year of starting at the very bottom and going one job at a time, literally one day at a time. That's how you make things. And so each job I would, if I did well, then I was lucky enough to connect with a producer who became a mentor. The next job I'd get a little more responsibility, and the job after that a little more. And by the end I was kind of a full producing partner, name on the poster, like on Brokeback Mountain, and then I started getting my own. So, I guess it really came together when I started getting those jobs on films, and sometimes the conditions are rough. It's cold, it's late, it's hours are long, and if you like it, you keep doing it, because you won't survive if you don't like it, because it's too hard to keep doing this stuff year after year after year unless you really are motivated to do it. I kind of had a laugh that tonight we'll be giving tips and tricks for breaking into the entertainment business. And the tip and the trick is you have to be crazy enough to like it enough to want to do it, and then just keep doing it and see where it takes you.
Kind of like around those same lines, like about like how you feel motivated and like how you keep going. One of our questions was like, as you both described, you've worked on a ton of different projects. As you like keep progressing through these different types of projects, how do you personally define and measure like your success? Like, how do you like produce something that you're proud of? How do you know it's something you're proud of? How do you define that, and has that changed over time?
Okay. Well, for me, the governing kind of lodestar, for lack of a better word, or the twin lodestars of how I've tried to navigate my career are based on people and material. So, if it's a script or some idea, if the material feels interesting and promising and something I would want to watch, that gets me interested. And then if it's someone I've either heard about or known or admired their work, or if I meet them and I think together we could do something interesting, that's, there's an aspect of this which is it's not really me choosing these things, it's those things choosing me. Because ultimately, the director or the writer who are the kind of creative leader of it, I'm starting to try to develop my own things, but generally it's been, I go in and meet with Jesse Armstrong, and he tells HBO whether they should hire me or not. And but the thing that gets me in the door with someone like Jesse is, that's a pretty cool piece of writing. I didn't know that it was going to become Succession when I first met on it, and I never know. I remember watching Brokeback Mountain, which became a huge hit and was like one of the big films of the year. People think it was cheated at the Oscars, but I was watching it in a room by myself. And I think, boy, is this quiet. I wonder if the audience is going to get this thing with the shirt at the end. And then I saw it here at Cornell. I brought it here to do a screening, and I said, oh yeah, they get it. So yeah, but for me, I've let the kind of prestige and the money and the acclaim and this stuff follow, choosing things based on material and people. And you know, I would like to try not to let, like, I think if you come into something saying this is going to win the Emmy and this is going to be like the biggest thing, that's when you're doomed. You know, whereas if you're kind of coming into it saying, no, this is pretty cool and I like this and these, you know, like that guy's all right or that woman's cool, I would like to do something with him and we'll try to make it our best. Those are the ones that have done actually better for me than the ones where I thought, well, this has a big giant star and it's got, you know, like the Temple Grandin was like, when they told me about that it's this movie about an autistic woman who designed slaughterhouses, and I said, you're making a movie out of this? And little did I know, you know, like that beat out the one with the giant Oscar-winning Hollywood star, which was also a good movie, but you know, it was a little movie that could. So, you know, so you go based on those instincts for me, at least.
Yeah, for me, I just feel lucky. I've just been able to chart my career along the lines of what am I most interested in and how do I make it happen. And in the public media sector, that's finding money, writing grants, getting people to trust you. I'd say that's maybe the major difference, in my opinion, between, obviously, actors have to trust directors and so on, but we need to get people to say, okay, I'm doing this, and I'm letting you into our kitchens and tell our life story, and we're not paying them, which is a level of like, you better do a good job. So earning that trust has been a big part of becoming a producer. And so, yeah, whether you're working with Julie Andrews and telling the history of the Broadway musical, or working with Billy Crystal on comedy, or whatever it is, if you have the passion for it and you find a way to earn people's trust, in my opinion, it works out. The money will show up somehow. Might not be all the money that you need, and that's the same
Even
on both
on
sides.
Succession, you know, nobody gives you a blank check, you know.
But I think it all boils back to that passion, that, you know, what keeps you up at night when you go, oh God, couldn't we try this? And if it keeps you up at night, then you know you're on the right track and it'll work out.
There's another way of it keeping you up at night that isn't so great, though. So. You know, it's interesting. One of the things I'm kind of learning, or that I think it's an interesting distinction, is that Michael actually gets to decide what film it is that he's going to make, whereas I kind of, you know, I end up getting asked to be a partner in a film, you know, and so it's, you know, the people at HBO who decide what their slate is, and he's the decider of the slate of American Masters. So there's kind of interesting different distinctions. So.
Yeah, I'd say the main distinction, though, which my brother-in-law has worked on big feature films, among them Titanic, and the catering line item on Succession is probably our season budget. So, you know, there's a different level of financial commitment involved. But yes, within the public media realm, I get to choose for American Masters, but my hope is that, again, those people are coming in with that passion, that desire, like, I have to make this film. We'll find the money. And those are the horses you want to bet on, so to speak.
Yeah. So what new exciting directions is film and TV going in that students might be interested in professionally? And also, like, does that tie into sort of how streaming services have evolved over time? Like, I think about, like, everyone used to watch Netflix a few years ago, and now there's all these streaming services. Like, so what is your opinion on that too?
Scott has a really good thumbnail sketch of the history of media with movies and TV and streaming.
Well, that, you know, part of this came out of a conversation we just had, going back to directors and writers. I'll try to be quick about that, but you know, the director is the kind of head of a movie, whereas the writer is the head of the television show. And that it's kind of a legacy of when these businesses started, because films were made in a silent film era where you didn't need dialogue, and the most important person on that set was somebody who knew where to put the camera and when to start and stop and what would cut together, so that was the director. Television actually grew out of radio drama, and in the beginning they didn't move, you know, they would shoot the honeymooners in one room, and so it was all about writing the dialogue and the gags, and so you know, and as I said before, I've been lucky to kind of straddle two major eras where, you know, in the 90s when I was kind of climbing the ladder the first time, I'm still climbing, but it's a different ladder. I'm on a different floor now. But in the 90s, the big heroic filmmakers, I got to work with some of them, like Milos Forman and Sidney Pollack and Robert Benton and Ang Lee. And then this new thing started happening, and I remember I was doing Man on the Moon, and we had this actor who was in Bob Newhart, and he was in Man on the Moon, and he's talking about this show, The Sopranos, and he said, the writing's amazing, and it's just really compelling, and I didn't even kind of know much about it, but there's this thing that happened because cable television became a really robust business where they could make money, and HBO had so much money they went from just putting movies on TV in the afternoon or evening or whatever to making their own, and they took a big bet on kind of backing this very creative story-driven approach, and they kind of hit it. They figured out, they made these landmark dramas like The Sopranos and The Wire and Sex and the City and The Night Of. And so I had a kind of a transition in the aughts where I was kind of both emerging from being kind of a second in command, working with this producer, Michael Hausman, to being my first chair producer. And during that time, we signed on to do a movie with Sidney Pollack about the 2000 election that became Recount. Sidney sadly got ill and had to drop out, but we did it with Jay Roach. And that was how I got my foot in the door of television. I was working on, so HBO came from the cable business. They were top of the game. They still are top of the game in terms of the kind of high-end television, quality-driven stuff. And I did like half a dozen of their 2-hour movies, and then they started recruiting me to do things with episodes. And the first one out of the first episodic thing I did was The Night Of, which was a pretty good piece. And Succession's the first thing I did with multiple seasons. So I have good beginner's luck, So, and we're going through transitions in terms of the streaming. There was streaming became a giant benefit to all the people that are in the manufacturing end, because there were suddenly so many more customers willing to make something, and it was kind of a volume-driven business. Somehow Netflix kind of had this philosophy: if we just make enough stuff, it'll work. And everybody felt this, like, literally, as HBO was trying to figure out its streaming model, it was a quantity driven business. And now there's a bit of a reevaluation of that. I think whatever the kind of stock market driven boom of filling up hours with material is kind of becoming they're trying to be a little more discerning and be a little more, figure out something that'll be profitable. And it's, I think we're not through that transition yet. It's been great for me because, I kind of worked my way in at a really good time and kind of landed on these kind of, I kind of took what I had learned doing cinematic movies, and, I'm essentially like a feature film producer working in television now. And it's I've been making the same kind of things the whole time. I've just moved from a 2-hour theatrical platform to this 1-hour cable and streaming platform. But a lot of the people are the same. Like Steve Zalian I worked with on All the King's Men, and I also worked with him on The Night Of. And, I consider Jesse as good as any of the filmmakers I've ever worked with, from Ang Lee to Milos, and the same thing with Steve. These are, I think there should be a theoretical combined Emmys and Oscars, because I think some of the things I've gotten to do on television would be in the running for, The Night Of and Succession for the best motion picture of the year.
I think I'm seeing this big television screen here, and I'm thinking about your question from a different angle, which is, I think once 65 and 70-inch screens were cheap enough to put in your living room, so everyone can have one, that was the sort of the quantum leap that is driving people. Yeah, I'd like to see a movie, but hey, I can see that same movie here for free, even though I'm paying $16 a month, in my living room, and I don't have to, in the COVID era, worry about COVID and so on. But what's next? we were talking earlier today, gaming is now bigger than all other forms of television and theatrical together. Documentaries, right before COVID, were doing extremely well in boutique cinemas around the country. Our films on Rita Moreno or Al Vanelli or Maya Angelou or Toni Morrison would play in 100 markets and make over $1 million, which for a documentary is not nothing. So exactly what's going to happen next? I think there'll still be the tentpole big studio movies that keep those cinemas in business, but I think when those Marvel movies and big tentpole movies can't fill every theater in the multiplex, they're going to go back to the kind of independent films that Scott used to produce, documentaries. Hopefully, if Netflix allows them to play before streaming them. I hope that window, it's called a windowing system, where first you're in theater, then you go to iTunes, then you are on television or subscription video on demand. And I think, as Scott points out, they're still trying to figure out the perfect way to sort of monetize every window.
My feeling is that the 2-hour theatrical movie will remain part of the marketplace, just as live theater has. Like, they didn't stop doing plays on stage when television or film came along. I do think at the high end and the kind of robust part of the market will be increasingly films that are kind of creating an experience in viewing them, and there's obviously the kind of big action-y Marvel things, and there's also these kind of, you had to be in the theater kind of films like The Revenant or Gravity or Dunkirk, where they'll make these kind of massive spectacles where you really feel immersed in the action of it. Whereas I don't know, I love the idea that there would be a market for character-driven, sophisticated drama, but I do think the 1-hour delivery system that you can watch when you want to is probably the future of the high end of that, because one of my theories is the theatrical movie is increasingly going to be for people who want to get out of the house and have the time. So it's kind of different. Yeah. So it's young people who don't have kids yet, or parents with small kids. Whereas if you've got a family and a kid and everything, and by the time you're done feeding them and all that, it's about 10 o'clock, and it's even hard to watch a 2-hour movie then. But I could watch an hour of something. I'll watch an episode. So that 1-hour drama is for the kind of things aimed at grown-ups, for lack of a better word. I do think that's a really powerful format.
So I wonder if you could talk about, I think that film and TV have such a power, the story has such a powerful impact on society. When you think of what stories you're telling and what stories you choose to work on, do you think of how they might impact people? Is there an educational purpose? Is there an solely entertainment? Do you feel like sometimes, it seems like people believe that some of these characters are the way society is. Talk a little bit about, you think, the impact of TV and film today, since everyone has a giant screen and is glued to it a lot of the time.
Actually, the thing I forgot was another big factor in it all is the presence of these computers, which we didn't have. Yeah. And so that does become a drain on your kind of brain time, and we're watching moving images more and more and more than ever now because of these. So anyway, why don't you start with that?
So entertainment and education is at the heart of public television. We're always, and American Masters in particular is trying to do what somebody wrote about called windows and mirrors theory. It's a psychological theory that, here's somebody who either looks like you're looking in a mirror and you go, boy, I wish I could aspire to write like Toni Morrison, who used to teach here at Cornell. Or you're looking out a window going, God, I'm not like that person at all, but they're doing something really interesting. How could I follow in their footsteps? So there's no question for documentaries, the educational value, whether it's explicit in terms of, you're learning about COVID, or you're learning about a certain kind of art, is clear, or if it's just implicit, built into the story. But the big question, I guess, is really for Scott in terms of fictional characters and whether, George S. Kaufman, the great playwright, said, satire is what closes on Saturday night, i.e. if you're trying to spin something, if you're trying to make fun of something, or in this case, if you're trying to teach a lesson, that doesn't work in the entertainment field. But I wonder, having done all the sort of very emotionally engaging projects you've worked on, if, that to what extent they change lives or they have that educational or emotionally impact that...
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because I think who we are and what our values are informs the choices we make in our lives. But and obviously, if you're working in kind of a public arena like PBS, there's a certain kind of goal of what kinds of films you make and what those mean in their educational purpose. Whereas, I've kind of gravitated toward this approach where it has to be it's entertainment, it's story driven. Within that, we're making constant, like if you watch Succession, it's taking all kinds of current event, topical things and taking a position on them, but not necessarily trying to preach in a didactic way. It's like using the heat of, some event that Jesse and the team found interesting and using it to propel the story. And, mainly, it all starts with telling a good story. And, some of what I think makes Succession so successful is not that it's about billionaires and has like this kind of satire parody of Rupert Murdoch. It's about a family drama, and everybody, most of us, all have experienced the conflicts of having these people you're kind of close with and rivalries with, and it was a very interesting layering process of how the scripts would evolve, where they'd start with the business story, and they did impeccable research. We had this wonderful journalist, Marissa Marr, who understands corporate business, and she would give us she was our kind of litmus test, would give us the responses that it was legit. Like everything, Jesse has always wanted to be like true to what would really happen. And then there's like these other layers. There's like the jokes. And then the most important layer, and the one that almost always came kind of last, was the core emotional family drama. And the episodes would kind of, they were all great at every stage, and you knew it was there, but it would go from, kind of like a Polaroid coming into focus. And when it got to the point of putting in like that emotional family stories, when it went from really good to just awesome and great. And so that's, for us, it was like trying to figure out the thing that's at the heart of it that we all understand and we all relate to. We're not billionaires, we're not millionaires, but we understand what it is to have a fight with our brothers or our, disappoint our parents. Yeah. So, and if people take from that, kind of an observation about the human condition, whether it has to do with the power of media or politics or money, we try to be true to what's going on with that. But I don't think we're trying to say this is the lesson of this episode.
Right. Makes sense. So I think we have one more quick question for each of you, and then we gotta.
You kind of touched on this a little bit, but in your opinion, what are the hallmarks of a great film, story, or TV show?
Wow. Boy. Eisenstein, go first.
I'm never going to live that one. For me, it's about what we were talking about before, emotionally engaging. Whether it's a documentary, whether it's a football game, if you're emotionally committed. In fact, I just heard this podcast with Brett Goldstein from Ted Lasso talking about how sports are an opportunity for men to express emotion. And they do so without looking at each other. They're watching the game, but they're crying, they're laughing, they're singing, whatever it is. And it's a unique kind of outlet emotionally, which I found really interesting in light of Ted Lasso. So for me, the end of a documentary or any project, if you've just been put through the ringer with highs or lows or what have you, then that's the, you know, it's the goal, it's the end game, to try and make sure it's not enough to tell somebody something or to do something artfully. I once had this argument with my parents. Robert Wilson is this great theater director who sculpts, you know, people moving in slow motion. The light is here, and all you'll see are fingertips in the light. And it's very dramatic. But they'd say, that's not a play. And I'd say, what do you mean? And people are paying money, there's an audience, that's what's happening. And they ultimately convinced me there was no emotional engagement. It was beautiful, you were wowed, but you didn't go, oh my God, that fingernail, I wish I had it back, or you know, my mother's fingernail, or whatever it is. So I just think it's all about heartfelt emotion.
Yeah, I had the kind of a bit of an aphorism a while ago that you know, a film can appeal to the head, the heart, or the groin. Let's say the visceral, like primal part of yourself, as opposed to, like, I'm not talking about Linda Lovelace or whatever, but you know, if you can get 2 out of 3, it'll probably be a decent movie. If you only get 1 of them, it's a little bit of a problem. But you know, so it really is like engaging your brain with something that you want to know more about, and also something that you feel about, or it can be this kind of, you know, either scary or exciting, action-driven experience that kind of pulls you into the experience of it. And the more of those you can kind of get singing at a good level, you know, the more engaged we are in what we're seeing. So having, you know, storytellers who kind of engage us in those different parts of ourselves, I think, is what makes it, I think, an interesting and special experience.
So what are you working on now or next, if you can share?
So American Masters has a bunch of interesting projects coming up. You can still stream the Fauci film, for those of you who haven't seen it, at pbs.org. And we have a series of digital shorts called In the Making, about masters in the making, emerging great artists like the opera singer Janae Bridges, or the country music star Reese Palmer, or a muralist in Detroit named Sidney James, who paints these amazing murals of black women in inner city Detroit. And upcoming on television is a film on Little Richard, a film on the video artist Namjoon Paik, who coined the term electronic superhighway. And next year we have a film on Art Spiegelman, who created Mouse. So I think when you are working kind of and busy, you always have, you're juggling projects. And we do 8 films a year, and that means we really are working on 16 to 20 films at any given time. And they're exciting.
So I'm essentially just like exiting my 5-year kind of term with doing Succession. I'm still in a little bit of denial that it's actually over. You know, I keep waiting for Jesse to send me, yes, send me the 11th script for season 4. But I have a kind of a very nice creative and business relationship with HBO, where they're kind of my port of call, and they're starting to like call me up and say, would you be interested in talking about this or that? And I'm reading something that you know, I don't want to really say until I haven't made a choice of what's next. So I'm both like getting things that are being sent to me, and I'm also developing a few things like books that I've found interesting. And you know, it's a good moment for me because Succession has kind of been so successful that I'm kind of able to get my feet in a few doors that I might not have been able to do recently. So I'm kind of trying to grow my own garden a little bit at the same time. I'm in this very nice relationship with such a wonderful organization as HBO, where they're sending me shows that they want to do. So I'll probably do a show with them as my next thing. I'm not sure what it is yet. And then there's a few things that I'm working in. I'm doing them with HBO that are being developed for kind of the next thing beyond, I hope. So
You're not doing the college drama in upstate New York.
There's a lot of college drama here.
Yeah.
Yeah, the opposite.
I would love to do something in it. I've tried once or twice. There was a movie HBO was doing about the Duke lacrosse
Oh yeah.
scandal, and Cornell has some nice collegiate Gothic architecture. It would have been good, but the movie tipped over, so we never made it. So, and there was a minute where I was like, we were looking for places we could get to without leaving New York State, and I thought about Cornell for a couple of things, but we ended up going elsewhere for those episodes. So, yeah.
Well, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was
So
great.
nice meeting you all.
Yeah.